The files we pulled for this deep dive are, they're just heartbreaking. They really detail a tragedy that didn't just explode out of nowhere.
No, not at all.
It seems like it festered, right there in plain sight for years.
Yeah.
And it eventually forced the whole country, really, to look closely at what we even mean by self-defense.
That's exactly right. We're zeroing in on the killing of Ajike A.J. Owens in Ocala, Florida. This was back in 2023.
Right.
And it's such a crucial case because, well, it goes way beyond just the simple crime report. It really became a flashpoint. It illustrates this devastating mix of long-running neighbor conflicts, documented racial bias, which is key here, and then these sweeping legal protections from Florida's Stand Your Ground law.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to really go beyond those headlines. We want to unpack the source material.
Get into the details.
Exactly. We need to dissect that, frankly, toxic 2-year history of friction that seems to have made this almost inevitable. Then we'll shift focus to the legal side. How was that sort of expansive idea of self-defense used by the defendant, Susan Lawrence? And crucially, why did investigators and then a jury reject it so firmly?
Well, when you boil it down to the incident itself, it happened around 9 p.m., June 2nd, 2023. Ajike Owens, she was 35. She went over to her neighbor's place, Lawrence, who was 58.
Right.
This was right after some kind of altercation involving Owens' kids.
Right, the immediate trigger.
Exactly. And Lawrence fired a single shot. Through her closed locked door, it struck Owens, killed her. But like you said, that moment, it was really the end result of years of documented problems and, well, unchecked hostility.
Okay, let's start with that history then, because the sources are just crystal clear on this. This wasn't like spontaneous. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was formally described as the culmination of a protracted dispute.
Yeah, that phrasing is important.
So what kind of documented friction are we actually talking about? How long had law enforcement been involved here?
We're talking years of tension. It dates back to at least January 2021. And the sheer number of calls, it's pretty shocking, actually. Right. Yeah, Marion County Sheriff's Office records, they confirm deputies were called to that specific block about 6 times, maybe more, for documented incidents just involving Lawrence and the Owens household.
6 times. Wow.
It suggests, this wasn't just a neighborhood feud simmering. They were actively calling the police, trying to get the legal system involved to mediate what was, well, fundamentally people just failing to live together.
And it's so frustrating because the core issue, when you read it on paper, sounds almost minor.
Right.
It was about Owens's children playing in a grassy area next to Lawrence's apartment, a common space, it seems.
A common space, yeah. But Lawrence repeatedly claimed it was hers, like her exclusive territory.
Her fixation on this little patch of grass, it seems like that was the root of all the toxicity.
It really was. The sources indicate Lawrence acted like the kids just being there was some kind of profound violation. One neighbor even told investigators Lawrence was, quote, angry all of the time, specifically about the children playing there, shouting nasty things, making it really clear they weren't wanted.
So it wasn't just disapproval, it was active harassment.
Oh, absolutely. An unrelenting 2-year campaign, really. Active harassment and intimidation, trying to stop these kids from just, existing in their own neighborhood space.
And we absolutely have to talk about the racial element here.
Yeah.
It's documented, and it really transforms this from just a neighbor dispute.
It absolutely does.
The source materials, particularly the arrest affidavit, the police records, they contain some really disturbing admissions from Lawrence herself.
This is critical context. It informs everything that happens later, legally. Lawrence admitted straight up to investigators that she had used racial slurs toward Owens's children.
Specifically.
Explicitly confessed to calling them the N-word.
Yeah.
And using other horrible terms like black slaves.
Oh my.
Yeah. So if you connect this history, this documented, targeted racial hatred, it makes her later claim of self-defense legally very, very weak.
It establishes a motive. Right. Malice, hostility, not reasonable fear.
Exactly. It contradicts the core idea of reasonable fear.
So it sets up this pattern where the children weren't just noisy kids, they were targets.
Targets of racial hostility, yeah. And deliberate efforts to intimidate them, to push them out of that space.
You can see it in the sheriff's logs, can't you?
Precisely. If you look at those logs, the deputies weren't dealing with two equally aggressive neighbors having a bad day.
No.
They were dealing with a consistent pattern. Lawrence escalating things, targeting young children with these awful racially charged insults. And this pattern is essential because when someone has a documented history of starting conflicts and expressing this kind of malice, it really erodes their ability to later claim they acted purely out of fear.
It suggests the action was maybe driven by that underlying aggression, not some immediate objective threat.
Exactly. Hostility rather than threat.
And this constant aggression, it tragically escalated. It became physical right before the shooting.
Yeah, that was the immediate catalyst.
The source material details it.
Yeah.
On the night of the shooting, Lorenz threw a pair of roller skates.
Threw them and struck Owens' 10-year-old son. Hit him in the foot. Okay. That seems to have been the breaking point. The sources also mentioned she might have swung an umbrella at another child just moments before that.
So Ajike Owens wasn't just knocking on the door because of noise or trespassing.
No, absolutely not. She was responding to a physical battery on her child.
That changes everything.
It does. This escalation from years of verbal abuse and slurs to physically assaulting a child with a thrown object, that's what forced Owens to go to Lorenz's door around 9 p.m. that night.
That distinction, responding to assault versus annoyance, it's just paramount, legally and ethically.
Absolutely. And it explains that feeling, that sense of tragic force that you hear from the community, from the family. Owens's mother, Pamela Dias, she put it so powerfully later, asking reporters, when does a person get shot for knocking on a door?
Such a heartbreaking question.
It reflects this profound frustration, right? 2 years of documented police calls, mediation attempts, warnings. None of it stopped the danger. It just escalated until it was lethal.
The system failed them.
That's certainly how the family and neighbors felt. It failed to protect Owens and her children from someone they knew was hostile.
And the source material even shows how close the deputies were, physically, right before it happened.
Yeah, they were actually there. Responding to one of Lawrence's frequent 911 calls this time, alleging she felt threatened by the children, they arrived at her door around 8:54 p.m.
Minutes before the shooting.
Moments later, Owens is shot.
Oh.
It suggests the hostility was so ingrained that even having law enforcement right there, it was just another stage for the conflict.
That tiny window, like 6 minutes between the deputies leaving and the confrontation, it just shows the breakdown.
It really does. Lawrence is calling 911, using emergency services, but at the same time, she's the one throwing things at the kids.
Playing both sides.
Exactly. This pattern, using the police to report her supposed victimization while she was the one being aggressive, that became key evidence later in court, showed a pattern of manipulative and hostile behavior.
Okay, let's transition now to the actual moments, the sequence of events on June 2nd, 2023. Around 9:01 p.m., Ajike Owens goes to Lawrence's front door. The sources paint a picture of, urgency, confrontation, spurred by that attack on her son.
Owens approaches the door. She's knocking, maybe pounding, calling out for Lawrence, clearly wants to confront her about the roller skates.
And Lawrence's response?
Not to open the door, not to talk. She immediately calls 911, reporting trespassing.
Okay.
But here's the key thing. The immediate escalation to lethal force. Within minutes before deputies could even get back there, probably before the 911 operator could fully process things, Lawrence fires that single shot.
Through the closed, locked door.
Through the closed, locked door, strikes Owens in the chest.
And the most devastating part, Owens wasn't alone. That just ramps up the emotional stakes, the legal stakes, everything.
It's foundational. Her 10-year-old son was standing right beside her when she was shot.
Oh, God.
Neighbors confirmed it. They heard the shot, then immediate screams, and then very clearly a child yelling, "They shot my mama!"
Horrifying.
One neighbor rushed out, started CPR right away until the emergency responders got there. And they were already close because of Lawrence's trespassing call.
Right.
But it was too late. Owens was pronounced dead shortly after 10 p.m., right there at the scene.
So now we get to the immediate legal core. The self-defense claim. Lawrence says she acted in self-defense, claims Owens was pounding aggressively. She feared the door would be broken down, feared for her life.
Mm-hmm.
This is where stand your ground theoretically comes into play.
It does, theoretically. But what's really striking here, and it speaks to how quickly the investigation moved, is how fast detectives dismantled that claim, that subjective claim of fear. They used objective evidence to counter it.
How so?
They explicitly stated that physical evidence and multiple eyewitness accounts flat out contradicted Lawrence's story. There was zero physical evidence, no damage to the frame, no splintered wood, nothing to suggest Owens was actually trying to force her way in.
That's the whole thing, isn't it? If the door is locked and undamaged, the threat isn't imminent. She fired through a barrier.
Exactly. The source material confirms it. That locked door was a significant physical barrier. It provided a buffer, time.
Right.
If Lawrence genuinely feared imminent entry, she had other options. She could have moved further back in her apartment. She could have waited for the deputies she'd already called.
Who were on their way.
Instead, she chose to fire blindly through that barrier, and that just destroys any claim that she was acting as a last resort to prevent death or great bodily harm.
The timing element you mentioned before also seems really critical in undermining her claim.
Oh, definitely.
Officials confirm she made 2 separate 911 calls that night, just minutes apart. She was calm enough to call 911 before the shooting, reporting trespassing.
That timing is just damning. It shows calculation, not pure panic. She's engaging emergency services, showing she had a non-lethal legal option available.
Yeah.
Yet she chose to use lethal force preemptively while expecting police to arrive. Firing through a closed door, knowing help is supposedly on the way, it removes that critical element of necessity that self-defense requires.
Even understand your ground.
You don't have to retreat, sure, but the threat still has to be imminent and unavoidable. A closed, locked door, especially when police have been called, kind of negates the unavoidable part.
So it seems like the whole picture, the history of aggression, the racial slurs, the fact she started the final confrontation by hurting the child and then shooting through a locked door, it gave investigators a pretty clear path.
It really did. The case wasn't going to be about whether Lawrence felt afraid. It was always about whether that fear was objectively reasonable, given the actual situation, the lack of imminent threat, her history of malice. The physical evidence of the door, plus that whole backstory of racial hostility, it proved the fear wasn't rooted in self-preservation. It was rooted in hostility.
Okay, so the killing of Ajike Owens immediately blew up nationally, and it put Florida's stand your ground laws right back in the spotlight.
Instantly.
For you listening, let's just quickly go beyond the basics. Florida's law lets you use deadly force if you reasonably believe it's needed to stop death or great bodily harm, and you don't have a duty to retreat.
Right, that's the core of it.
But what did that mean procedurally, like in the immediate aftermath of this specific shooting?
This is where it gets really interesting, and maybe a bit different from some other SYG cases. Florida's law, which is basically an expansion of the old castle doctrine, it grants a kind of immunity. So typically, if you claim stand your ground, you can get a pretrial immunity hearing. A judge looks at the evidence, preponderance of evidence standard, and decides if the force was justified.
And if the judge says yes.
Charges dropped, no trial. The burden's initially on the defense to raise it, but yeah. It's a powerful protection.
Okay, so that procedural protection explains why there was that, 5-day delay between the shooting and Lawrence's arrest?
Exactly.
The public was furious, but Sheriff Woods initially held back.
He had to be extremely careful, because even with the terrible optics, they had to be absolutely sure they could overcome a potential SYG defense. Otherwise, an arrest might lead nowhere if immunity was granted later.
They needed proof that her reasonable fear claim just wasn't plausible.
Ironclad proof. And you had figures like Attorney Benjamin Crump stepping in immediately, voicing that public anger. He called for the arrest, described it as just an unconscionable killing of a mother who simply knocked on a door.
And there were protests, right, outside the courthouse.
Yeah, protesters gathered outside the Marion County Judicial Center, demanding action. They even met with the state attorney, William Galadson. This public pressure definitely put a strain on the investigation.
Must have.
But it also, arguably, forced a really rigorous look at the statute's application here. Investigators spent those 5 days doing meticulous work. Forensics, digital records, interviewing witnesses again and again, especially those 4 children.
Connecting the dots.
Connecting the shooting directly back to those 2 years of documented racial aggression. They were building the case specifically to counter that predictable SYG defense.
And the turning point was June 7th, 2023. Lawrence is arrested.
Yeah.
And Sheriff Wood's public statement after that was pretty striking. He basically drew a line in the sand.
He really did. He stated publicly, very clearly, that the law did not justify firing through a locked door. His exact words from the source material. This situation is a prime example of when it was not justified. It was simply a killing.
Wow, that's blunt.
It was crucial. It signaled that the evidence The locked door, no forced entry, the documented malice had completely undermined the standard of reasonable belief needed for that SYG immunity.
So once they cleared that hurdle, Lawrence faced specific criminal charges. Can we break those down? Why those charges and not, say, second-degree murder?
Okay, the charges were very specific, very strategic. Manslaughter with a firearm, culpable negligence, battery, and 2 counts of assault, which related back to the earlier aggression against the kids.
Manslaughter specifically, why that?
Manslaughter, under Florida law, involves causing a death through an act, procurement, or culpable negligence. That last part was key.
Culpable negligence, what does that mean legally?
It means more than just simple carelessness. It's defined as gross and flagrant indifference or disregard for human life and safety. A conscious indifference to the consequences of your actions.
Okay, I see.
Firing blindly through a door, knowing people, including children, are likely on the other side.
Yeah.
That fits culpable negligence perfectly. They didn't have to prove she intended to kill Ajike Owens.
Just that her reckless indifference led to the death.
Exactly. And that history of racial slurs that helped prove her indifference was rooted in malice, not genuine fear.
That's a really deep legal insight. It connects the feud history directly to the charge they could actually win.
Absolutely. And the trial, it happened in August 2024. The prosecution hammered that history of aggression in their closing arguments, said the real motive was hatred and anger, leading to this rash, reckless act.
And the jury?
Came back fast, shockingly fast.
Yeah.
An all-white, 6-person jury found her guilty of manslaughter with a firearm after only about 2 hours of deliberation.
2 hours. That suggests the prosecution's case was pretty overwhelming.
It does. That narrative, culpable negligence driven by depraved disregard, not self-defense, must have been incredibly convincing, especially against the backdrop of the physical evidence contradicting her story. They clearly saw reckless indifference.
Then came sentencing in November 2024. What did the judge focus on?
Lawrence got 25 years in state prison. The judge highlighted 2 main things for that lengthy sentence. First, the indiscriminate nature of her actions, just the sheer recklessness of firing through a wall. And second, the immense trauma inflicted on Owens's 4 children, who had to witness the immediate devastating aftermath. The judge recognized the crime was compounded by that psychological damage.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? Stand your ground laws might offer broad protections, but they aren't a free pass. Reasonableness still matters.
And malice and recklessness can defeat it. This case set a pretty clear boundary. Even in your home, the court said, a locked door is a barrier against imminent threat. Firing through it flips self-defense into aggression.
Beyond the trial itself, the ripples from Ajike Owens' death really spread out. It moved from being just a local crime story into this national flashpoint for civil rights and gun law debates.
Immediately, civil rights advocates saw this case as a symbol.
A symbol of what, specifically?
A symbol for the argument that these broad stand-your-ground laws can create a dangerous culture, what some call a shoot first, think later mentality.
Right. The difference between defending your life as a last resort versus using lethal force for any perceived threat, no matter how minor or distant.
Exactly. I remember the source material quoted that William and Mary Law School professor, who put it perfectly, said the self-defense principle had mutated into a shoot-first belief rather than a last resort protection.
That really sums up the critic's view, doesn't it?
It does. When the law seems to allow lethal force as the first response, not the last, it arguably encourages aggression. Advocates argue the vagueness in these laws, especially around reasonable belief, lets things like racial bias and personal grudges hide behind a self-defense claim.
And Owens' family, along with advocacy groups, they push for actual policy changes.
Oh, yeah. They partnered up, supporting efforts to clarify or even repeal some of these broad SYG provisions. They use this case as definitive proof of how these laws can be misused.
And that partnership shows how the family turned their grief into action. Owens' mother, Pamela Dias, she started a nonprofit.
Yes, Standing in the Gap, a really crucial part of Ajike Owens' legacy.
What does it do?
It's dedicated to providing real, tangible support money, counseling for other families hit by racially motivated violence. It's trying to fill that systemic gap, acknowledging that recovery isn't just emotional, it's financial too.
So Ajike's memory isn't just tied to the tragedy, but to helping others.
Exactly. Systemic assistance.
But as important as all that advocacy is, we have to come back to the human cost, especially the trauma for her 4 children. This part of the source material is just incredibly hard to read.
It's the most devastating part of the whole story. The sources detail this intense, lasting trauma. especially for the 10-year-old boy who was right there.
Stood beside her.
Yeah. Pamela Dias talked about how that child was just consumed with guilt afterwards because he tried to save his mother, felt he failed. He apparently told his grandmother, Grandma, I couldn't save her.
Oh, that's unbearable. That weight on a child.
That sense of responsibility, powerlessness, forced on a kid by an adult's reckless violence, it's just a profound, enduring consequence.
That kind of emotional weight, combined with the public awareness of the systemic issues and the clear legal verdict,
Yeah.
it meant the case really resonated, didn't it? It went beyond the news cycle.
Absolutely. It became the subject of a major documentary film in 2025, The Perfect Neighbor.
Right, I heard about that.
It used a lot of the source material we've been discussing, police body cam footage, firsthand accounts from neighbors, the family, gave this really visceral look at those 2 years of escalating hostility.
And it got significant recognition, Sundance Award, right?
Yeah, won the directing award for U.S. documentary at Sundance 2025, then debuted on Netflix and hit #1 in the U.S. That shows this huge public appetite to understand not just what happened, but why the system couldn't prevent it.
That level of exposure really cemented this case as a landmark, didn't it? In the ongoing national conversations about race, community conflict, self-defense laws.
For sure. Ajike Owens' story will be a reference point in those debates for years. And finally, as a permanent way to remember her, plans were announced for a mural in downtown Ocala.
A public commemoration.
Yeah, symbolizing the community's commitment, hopefully, to reckon with this painful event and, try to move toward healing. A lasting visible marker right there where it all happened.
Wrapping up this deep dive, the source material gives us a pretty clear synthesis, I think. The killing of Ajike Owens was this catastrophic result of a long, festering neighborhood fight, fueled by documented racial bias and aggression. And when that volatile mix met an expansive interpretation of self-defense laws, well, it created the perfect storm.
Yeah, the ultimate powder keg.
Right.
But the legal system in this specific case did function to find a measure of justice. It ruled definitively that firing through a locked door,
Right.
after you initiated the final conflict by assaulting someone's child, that's not reasonable self-defense.
Yeah.
The prosecution successfully used that 2-year history of malice and slurs to completely dismantle her claim of justifiable fear.
So what does this all mean for you listening? This case forces us past the basic facts. We have to consider the systemic issues. How do we balance private property rights and self-defense with the simple right for kids to play in a shared space?
Right, and the potential for these lethal force laws to be twisted, weaponized by personal hostility.
So if the core purpose of a stand-your-ground law is truly about protecting against imminent threat, we're left with a final, maybe provocative thought for you to consider.
Yeah.
Something that has to drive future policy debates.
Which is, how much weight should a long-documented history of aggression and racial hostility between neighbors' years of conflict carry when we're deciding if a self-defense claim is objectively reasonable?
Yeah.
When the conflict is proven to be rooted in malice, does that idea of reasonable fear just become impossible to sustain legally? That's the really tough line lawmakers have to keep wrestling with.
A deeply complex case. Profound implications for how we define safety, community, and accountability right in our own neighborhoods. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.